And start with a welcome and roll call. We're all here. Mark, Bill, Joanne, Howard, Perry, John, and Cindy. We have on the agenda today public comment, and that public comment is for anyone that may want to ask questions or address things that are on the agenda that we're discussing today. We have one member of the public present.
Do you have agendas?
Yes.
We do. And we're going to limit the, we typically don't have public, so we're interested in, and if you do have public comment, and we'd like to limit those comments to 5 minutes, please. And also, we'll take the public comment now, and we'll continue our discussions throughout the meeting, and we'll not take public comment at that time, just now.
I have no public comment
Okay.
right now. Thank you.
Okay. John, new business.
Excuse me, just for the record, do you mind stating your name?
My name is John Donches, Emmaus resident. Here, I see you have the TIF. You're going to talk about that, and I'm probably more interested in that.
Okay, thank you.
As far as comments, though, we're not going to take comments later on that. Okay. Just procedurally, that's just how we run our meetings. Okay.
Fine.
Great.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. John, new business.
Sure. I have actually nothing new business. Our agenda is solely consisting of old business, if you will.
On old business, the first item is regarding Hamilton Crossing. And between John Lucius and John Kingsley, if we could just provide a summary of the meeting that occurred by the 3 taxing bodies on Friday afternoon regarding the discussion of the first TIF committee meeting and the project.
You want to start, should I?
Okay, good morning.
Sure. Okay. Last Friday afternoon, we convened the first of what will be several tax increment financing committee hearing meetings, and the focus of the meeting was really to do a background on the project and also to talk about the potential use for tax increment financing, give the committee members a good, strong, foundation in the project as well as the concept of tax increment financing, and begin working towards an extended agenda at future meetings. The meeting we didn't get to any of the agenda items in terms of discussion of the meeting. We actually were in the opening comments. Vic Mazziotti, one of the TIF committee members and the Lehigh County Commissioner, asked the question as to whether the meetings could or should be public. And a long discussion ensued with all of the tax increment financing representatives being very involved in the discussion. Ultimately, what came from the discussion is they have asked the authority to consider, as being the entity that has called the meetings, to consider whether the meetings should be public. And that is why that agenda item actually sits on your agenda now. I know John sent out a more exhaustive overview of the proceedings of that meeting, but I'll kind of defer to that document as being sort of the exhaustive detail on what actually transpired.
Any questions for John on the summary of that? Okay.
The issue then before this board is, I think, clear. And as John said, it comes as basically an outgrowth of the meeting on Friday, is whether the so-called TIF committee meetings relating to the Hamilton Crossings project should be open to the public. The TIF committee members did not make that decision. They basically deferred to this board after I said it should be a board decision, because at one point during the meeting on last Friday, there was some commentary to the effect that John Kingsley or I as a solicitor should make that decision. And I did not believe that John, who is not a member of this board, but is fully authorized to represent this board in the TIF process, I believe that neither John nor I should be the party person that made what amounted to a unilateral decision and indicated that this would be discussed before the board. As just to reiterate a few points that have been made in our prior communications. Number one, there is no requirement under the law that TIF committee meetings be open to the public. Number two, as a matter of practice, the TIF consultants that we have dealt with are not aware of any TIF project in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania where the TIF committee meetings have ever been open to the public. Number three, the developer stated very clearly, front and center, that because a substantial amount of information will be discussed at TIF committee meetings, that is of a sensitive and confidential nature, it did not want that information in the public domain, at least certainly not before the TIF committee members had the opportunity to review it, evaluate it, study it, and address any issues associated with it. Basically, then the decision is this board's to make, and whatever decision you make, we will then relay it to the rest of the, we will relay it to the TIF committee members. We have a meeting, a non-public meeting scheduled right now for tomorrow, which is really a continuation of last Friday's non-public meeting, at which the outcome of this meeting will be discussed, and then the appropriate procedural protocol will be put in place that will govern the meetings on a going forward basis. I did respond, or I did send out to each of you correspondence earlier today, I think very earlier today, concerning various options that are available to the board. And I think all of you have seen them, probably had at least some opportunity to think about them. The options ranging from non-public meetings in their entirety to having every meeting open to the public, and then some iterations in between those kind of two outer absolute options. I'm happy to answer questions.
Scott, do you have any other thoughts, comments?
I do. I've been involved in a number of successful TIF projects in both counties, and most recently the Route 33 interchange TIF in Northampton County. And it's been my experience that the level of communication and financial data of a private developer needs to have a deep layer of confidentiality, and that in all circumstances I've been involved with, the TIF committees have met privately, with the understanding that there will be multiple presentations in public to all three taxing bodies before ultimately there's a vote. And so, I do believe that based upon how the bonds for a TIF would be backed, that kind of essential financial data simply could not be subject to the public domain. So the TIF committee has some very serious obligations under the Act, and John is right, there's no requirement that they be public. And so if you were looking for one more consideration is that the developers have already spent a substantial amount of time and money, and there's been state money involved in this particular project, that the developers' plea to John bears some significant weight.
Thank you. From the board, questions? Comments?
Scott, are you saying that it's not legal for us to allow this information to get out, that we have an obligation to the developer not to have this information divulged? Is that what you're saying?
Well, that's part of what I'm saying is that information is provided. John, I don't know if they're in the early stages, whether it was a non-disclosure or confidentiality agreement as part of the developer signing with the IDA, but that's pretty typical, Joanne.
No, it's something in this particular project doesn't do.
Also, bear in mind that the developer, separate from the IDA, may be under confidentiality constraints. As an example, the property that is the subject of this proposed development is owned by the Diocese of Allentown. And the property is under an agreement of sale between the diocese and the developer, the terms of which are confidential. Even as the attorney involved, I don't know what those terms and conditions are. I don't know the purchase price, don't know the conditions. I've seen a semi-redacted version that almost looked like a form agreement at some point, but I do know that the agreement has been modified, not rewritten in its entirety, so that the point is the developer simply may not be able to in its own right, disclose everything, but clearly, as Scott's saying, the developer is going to be sharing information about, for example, prospective tenants, cost of development, cost of remediation, that ultimately very well may end up in the public domain, but at the appropriate time, after the TIF committee has had the opportunity to study it, to question it, to evaluate it, to review it, and then encapsulate it in a TIF plan that would be presented to each of the three taxing bodies in one or more public meetings for review and ultimately for a vote to what is commonly known as to opt in or to opt out of the TIF itself.
And I'm not sure the legislative process for all of the taxing bodies. I know at the Lehigh County side, it's the ordinance, so it's 2 meetings. So there would be a meeting, and then depending on the schedule, 2 to 3 weeks later, there'd be a second meeting where there would be a vote. There's not a vote on the first
That is
meeting.
what was done with the West Hills Partners TIF, and at the township and at the school board levels, there would be at least one additional public meeting. When I say additional, we've already had one public meeting before each of those 3 taxing bodies. So there would be at least, with respect to the township and the school board, a second public meeting at which the public at large can come and provide its input, whatever that may be, on the TIF plan, and ultimately what they believe, how they believe the board of the governing body should vote.
And at those meetings, the developer shared a summary of the project. So they discussed the location, they discussed the relative size, they discussed their plans, and I believe they've been working with the municipality, Lower Macungie, on the planning
The
requirements.
developer has already received several approvals from the township. Also, just as background, the amount of the TIF is not finalized. That would be part of the overall TIF committee work. But the projected amount of the TIF is about 5% of the total project costs right now. And the clear intent of the developer at this point is to have the dollars generated from the TIF to be used for public infrastructure improvements that are being mandated by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania Department of Transportation. Most notably a service road off of the Route 222 bypass.
John Scott, if I could ask a question. From your experience and expertise on the whole TIF process, do you see any additional financial and/or legal exposure for the developer and any of the taxing bodies by making these meetings public?
Let me take a stab at that. That's the great unknown. The biggest risk of all potentially would be that the developers would decide that they are going to not pursue the project at all. Although I believe John's right that it's approximately 5%. 5% is still a substantial sum of money, and we don't know what other requirements they have under their agreement with the diocese. So that is just, I would call that a real risk. Not
to interrupt you, Scott,
yeah.
but along that same line. So currently, what are the taxes being generated from that parcel, and what are the projected taxes?
That's a good question. I'm not positive if our TIF expert is Joe Hogan's part of this. John, right?
Joe Hogan is one of the TIF consultants. He has been retained by the developer.
Right, not by the board, but he's run some I think he's run some preliminary figures.
He has.
Right now, that tract of land is generating either zero taxes to the three taxing bodies or a very, very small amount.
Now, I may be wrong, but I was under the impression, I thought I had read somewhere around $55,000 currently being generated, and they project upwards of $1.3 million, $1.5 million.
Oh, I don't know about the 55,000, John. Does that sound right to you?
Well, it's owned by the church, so there being no taxes, I guess. I haven't looked at that.
They may pay some pilots. They may pay some money in lieu of
Here
taxes.
is-
We have the number.
I have
We have
the
the number.
I have
They
the
have no
number.
property tax.
No property
Okay,
tax.
John.
I have the number that has been put together by Joe Hogan. First, with respect to the East Penn School District, $1,156,250 is the portion of property tax revenue generated by the project annually.
Once it's
If the TIF is
completed.
approved.
Once the project.
Okay, and remember, a TIF is 20 years. After 20 years, there is no sharing of the incremental tax revenues.
John,
They
can I
all-
interrupt you a second, though?
Yes.
I'm having a problem. Our discussion is whether or not to make, not the warrants of the project right now, but whether or not to make the meeting public. I'm not sure that this is the discussion where we're dealing with.
I'm answering his
I
question.
would
Well, the only reason I brought it up was really, if indeed, as Scott mentioned, if the developer decides this becomes way too cumbersome and pulls out, what the potential loss is for those taxing bodies. That's really the only reason.
And I didn't mean to cut you off.
No,
I just
that's all
stopped you. Because my other comment is that, the
We just
developer.
answer John's question first, because I think we have the answers. We can quickly,
In addition to the revenue generated from the TIF itself, bear in mind that each of the three taxing bodies will also receive revenues, increased revenues, in fact, from, among other things, earned income tax and realty transfer tax. The projected revenue to Lehigh County annually from the TIF itself is almost $268,000. and to the township, which does not have any real estate tax at this point. Believe it or not, Lower Macungie Township does not have a real property tax. Notwithstanding that, the revenue to the township over 20 years coming from things such as earned income tax, realty transfer tax, local services tax, exceeds $1.3 million.
What's the current amount of taxes collected?
I thought I heard somewhere that it was less than $10,000.
Yeah, that's what I think it is too.
It was,
Well,
actually,
for some reason, sticks in
$8,000.
my
bear
head.
in mind that much of the property is tax exempt because it's owned by the diocese.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, Howard, go ahead.
Yeah, my other comment, I'm disappointed in the developer if he was concerned about confidentiality, that has not once been raised in all of our discussion, with the exception of the discussion about the agreement of sale. That they made clear at our initial meeting that we were not able to get. But for them to be arguing that right now, and that doesn't change what we're talking about of whether to make it public or not, but it's an issue that is popped up.
I made it clear on Friday, and I want to make it clear again, that the role of this authority is outlined by statute. The role of this authority is not to pick sides. But having said that, the one comment I will make in defense of the developer is that no developer who has come before this IDA in the past, including the current developer, ever expected that it would have to deal with this kind of issue.
I accept that. Doesn't change what they're throwing at us at this point. Okay.
Other comments or questions from any board members?
I mean, when do you want to hear our individual takes on this?
Please, let's go.
Anytime?
No, you start.
From my chair, I've been a commercial lender for 34 years, okay? A borrower's confidentiality is unquestioned. Protecting their information is our first priority, okay? Prior to now, they may not have talked about confidentiality because what they were doing was laying out a piece of land and where buildings might reside on a piece of land and how big a piece of land, each building was going to take. Now they're going to start laying out financial information. Theirs, their tenants, and privacy of that information is paramount. The crafters, I believe, of the TIF legislation looked at the TIF committee like a loan committee at a bank. To me, this is akin to a developer getting a project, getting it approved, bringing it to a financial institution for borrowing purposes, and opening that committee meeting to the public for comment on, the credit merits or what have you of the information being presented. And that wouldn't happen. It wouldn't happen. And the reason the TIF was crafted the way it was, the crafters knew it shouldn't happen. That the developer deserves confidentiality and privacy in that part of the process. You can lose a major tenant if their financial information were to get, and look, we all assume that all these big companies we see along the highway are public companies. Not all are. Some of these tenants are privately owned companies, and they deserve privacy in this process. So when John goes to the two extremes, being a lender for 34 years, my take on this thing is the TIF committee should be non-public. The meeting should be private because we're going to be discussing very sensitive information, private financial information, both on the part of the developer and their tenants, with respect to the agreement of sale with the diocese. And again, as John said, some of that information may be public as time goes on, in these presentations that have to be made after the TIF committee's work is done. But I think we need to let the TIF committee do its job. And the job, as it was stated by the crafters of the act. That's my take on it, and that's the way I'll vote.
Okay, thank you for that background.
John?
I fully agree with Harry, and otherwise, as Scott stated, and then you stated also, John, is the fact that it's from a statutory standpoint, they've already stated that they don't have to be public. So I think there's obviously was a rationale and a logic behind that, so I fully support the fact that they should not be public either.
Joanne?
I agree with them, and, it's up to all of you, but I'm open to finding out, why they're requesting this, and if there's something we can do to, reach out to them and say, here's some information you might want to know without, I would be open to that, but, based on what Scott and John said and the law and what you're saying, I don't think we have any other thing but to keep this private, and there's no other place in the country that has not kept it private, and we need to respect the lender.
Howard?
No comment at this time.
Bill?
I don't have any comment this time.
Mark? I'm sorry. Did I miss somebody? No, I didn't believe I did. Okay. The heads are in the way. I apologize.
Yeah, I'm going to support Harry's thought process, being a commercial lender as well. I think there is an assumed level of confidentiality, even though it's not verbally stated. I think when they do come to us, they expect that. And I will support the closed meeting.
Any other comments for anybody?
Does it require a motion?
In this particular situation, I believe if there's no other comments, at least for now, and I want to state this for the record, I did not ask Cindy for her comments. As all of the board members know, Cindy is not only the chairperson of this board, she is also, Cindy, I never know your exact title, so I just say she heads up the Department of Community and Economic Development, Lehigh County. In much to Cindy's credit, she has been very, very sensitive to even creating an appearance that somehow in her role at the county, in her role here, that she is conflicted or her views favor a particular developer or particular project. So that's just for the sake of the minutes, that's why I did not ask Cindy for her input. Cindy, that was not a slight. If you have any other comments, fine. If not,
No, I understand.
We respect that as well.
Thank you. And you all know I've worked every major deal that's occurred in Lehigh County over the past 7 years. So they're tricky, and there are issues you need to make sure you're working through.
Any other comments? Then I think a motion, if one of you is willing to make it, is in order.
While I'm not satisfied over the elected officials, I will move to support that we can keep the meetings confidential, that our board votes to maintain this confidentiality of the meetings.
Now, and you all know that, and I think John, you went over this, the details of that will be discussed by the committee, will be discussed in public many, many times.
There is nothing to prevent any one of the taxing bodies. Well, first of all, a motion has been made, okay? Following Robert's Rules of Orders, do we have a second for the motion?
Second.
Okay, now we can discuss it. And if, I'm going to finish my comment. This is up to the taxing bodies, but there is nothing to preclude a taxing body from asking the LCIDA to come and give an interim status report at a public meeting as to how things are going, and to the extent that there's there's non-confidential information that can be disclosed. And as part, now, have we normally done that? No, but there's nothing to preclude us from doing that if, in fact, this board in response to the taxing body's request, wanted to do that. Scott, with your experiences, please feel free to supplement.
Well, that's a good point. On the Route 33 interchange TIF in Northampton County, we routinely went to the committees. The county council had an economic development committee. I don't know if Lehigh County has a specific economic development committee. I think
Similar,
they do.
it's called Development Committee.
The development committee, and and presentations will be made at that level to keep them up to speed on what was going on, if there were changes, if there were obstacles, or what have you. And those are more for communication purposes. But you know, like I said earlier, at the end, there's going to have to be a minimum of one more meeting, as John said, for both the school board and for the township, and 2 for the county before there's a county vote by the commissioners. So that's my supplement to what John said.
I will also, I'm sorry, do you want to say? I also want to make this comment because it was discussed in our communications. There were some concerns expressed about potential political backlash against this board if it voted a certain way versus another way. My recommendation to this board as the solicitor is that you vote the way you believe. There always is the possibility of political backlash with any vote you have. In this case, because it's so front and center and so much of focus, it's been so much of a focus, you can debate whether or not the probability of any backlash is higher than normal. But this is remember, this is a board that was formed in 1967 under a specific state statute. While you are all appointed by the county executive, you make your decisions separate and apart from county council or any other taxing body. And if you've made an informed decision after appropriate discussion, I, as your solicitor, will be prepared to defend that to anybody. And if I have to bring in other people, either in my firm or recommend others outside our firm, I am prepared to do that. And Scott, I think you will concur with that.
I do, but I wanted to add one footnote to what I just said, which was that in the Route 33, and I think it'll be a factor here, there's going to be public concern about traffic and how is traffic being handled. And that was a perfect example for the TIF committee to meet privately with the traffic engineers for the developer, to come up with the right answers, and then to make a presentation to the Economic Development Committee to keep them informed. And so, the necessary public information about this project will have to be public when the time is right.
And to supplement that, the developer has told us that it has already been very involved in discussions with PennDOT. And as I indicated earlier, the developer has been before the township on multiple occasions to request permits, variances, whatever. I don't even know all the details, but my understanding is that the developer's land development plan has now been finalized and approved.
And John Kingsley's planning to take minutes for the IDA of all of the meetings.
That's a very good point.
So
there will be minutes taken of every TIF committee meeting. The minutes will be presented in draft form, circulated to the TIF committee members for review and edit as necessary and appropriate. The minutes will then be finalized, given to the TIF committee members with the understanding that they can share those minutes with their colleagues on their boards, their constituents, whomever. No question about that whatsoever. Any other discussion on this motion?
I just had one, this has more to do, rather than the substantive issue at stake here, just the wording that we had so far. Not criticizing Howard. Howard put it out there. I would prefer to hear it that we're deciding to make it non-public rather than confidential.
That is the more appropriate term. And if I may make another comment, there was an actual discussion on or last Friday concerning what the term open meant in the context of these meetings. And Mark Fisher, who is the solicitor to the East Penn School Board, actually was also stating some aspects about the law and said, respectfully, in my role, when a meeting is described as public, or I should say is open, that means it is subject to the Sunshine Law, in that any member of the public, whether a general member of the public, a member of a news entity, is entitled to come to that meeting. It's not a case where you're doing it informally. It's either formally open to the public, or as I like what you said, Bill, or it is not open to the public.
Do we?
We have
Do I have to move for that?
He's got to
Yeah,
Okay, so that now,
Okay.
if there isn't any other
Then we need a
discussion,
second, and then we
I'll second the motion.
Okay,
as
and-
amended,
And
okay?
John, can you now reread that resolution, please?
And the amended motion that Howard is making is that the meetings of the Tax Increment Financing Committee will now be, it is the position of the Lehigh County Industrial Development Authority that the tax increment financing hearings for the Hamilton Crossings tax increment financing district will be non-public.
I would suggest not meeting.
Not hearings, but meetings. Yes.
Yes, you're correct. I'm sorry.
And
I don't know, I'm glad that we're adding into the motion
Yes.
that this specific TIF, so that it doesn't set a precedent for anything further. We're talking about a
Right.
motion on.
I was
this
ready to
particular
say
TIF.
relating to the Hamilton.
Don't let me talk, okay.
I'm sorry, forgive me.
And perhaps I am amending your motion for you. I shouldn't do that. Let's
Well,
try
you've
this.
done that, let's
try this
let's reread
again.
it.
The motion is by Howard to make
As
have the
amended by
Lehigh
Bill.
County Industrial Development Authority hold the tax increment financing committee meetings associated with the Hamilton Crossings project as non-public meetings.
That's the motion as amended.
Is that correct?
Any further comment on the motion as amended?
Ready for a vote?
Then I think we're ready for a vote.
All in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed?
And I'm abstaining as
Okay,
you suggested.
so the vote carried 6-0 with one, am I right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? Is it 5 with one abstention? Oh, sorry. 6 and 1 abstention.
We
Okay.
have 7 members.
7, so we have 6
But
yes
you're
and
abstaining.
1 abstention. Okay.
Thank you. Good dialogue. I think everyone understood the process. I appreciate our attorneys working through the process.
So I'll just, it is.
Okay.
So I can talk about the project and just circulate it.
So I'm sorry.
I
I
apologize.
apologize. I interrupted you, Cindy.
Okay.
I was just asking for our next
I'm
agenda item.
apologizing.
Okay, no, I was just thanking everybody for going through that process. We haven't been in this situation before. I think we've had a lot of thoughtful discussion, and I think that was helpful for everyone. Next item on the agenda is Life Path. And John, we did some bond financing for them in 2012.
I'll give background on the project. A resolution, and I apologize with what happened with this meeting. I meant to email it to John, and our phone systems are down at work. Here's the background briefly, and I do have a resolution which I can, I kind of know it by memory. LifePath is a 501c3 corporation. In 1998, this authority acted as the financing conduit in connection with the issuance of bonds, complete with trustee underwriter in the amount of $9.47 million. LifePath would like now to refund the bonds with a new tax-exempt financing. The reason is simple. The interest rate on the bonds issued in 1998 is substantially higher than what the interest rate would be on it in connection with the new bond financing. And the bankers are nodding their heads. The current outstanding principal amount of the LifePath 1998 bonds is $6.98 million. What LifePath did last year, if you recall, was a tax-exempt financing with Fox Chase Bank. And just as background, I think all of you know what LifePath does. Does tremendous work with people of various ages who have primarily mental and also physical challenges, to say the least. It operates group homes in 6 counties. And basically what we did in November of 2012 was a tax-exempt financing that allowed LifePath to take out real estate-related debt that it had incurred with, of all entities, the United States Department of Agriculture many years ago under some program that existed then. The USDA debt has all been satisfied. Now what LifePath wants to do, as I said, is take out the outstanding amount of the 1998 bonds. Fox Chase Bank is going to be the lender involved again. There will not be a formal issuance of bonds. This will be what is tantamount to a private placement, what we've seen many times before, a revenue note that is essentially issued by the authority and purchased, in this case, by Fox Chase Bank. The savings to LifePath on an annual basis are very, very significant and come at a time when LifePath, like many entities similarly situated to it, has been facing funding cuts from state and federal government sources. I'm pleased to announce that Lvedc and I have been doing a lot of work, and his tax folks at Stevens and Lee have concluded that we do not have to have a TEFRA hearing on this. We don't have to go before 5 counties as we did in 2012, and we can get to the end game pretty quickly. Again, I apologize, I had the resolution, but basically the resolution is written as a typical, what we call bond inducement resolution, where this authority agrees to issue a revenue note, in this case, as I said, that would satisfy the 1998 bonds. The one thing, John, that Ed and I are not totally firm on at this point is whether this will be, quote, bank qualified. We presume that Fox Chase will want it to be bank qualified. And does everybody know what bank qualified means? And John, you may want to take 30 seconds, just because you know it even better than me.
The bank qualification will actually allow kind of a dual tax exemption of the project. The interest income to the lender will actually be tax exempt. They will also have the ability to deduct a portion of their carrying costs associated with the financing. So their cost of money, the bank will actually be able to deduct, I believe it is 80% of their carrying cost of funds. So there is actually, at the end of the day, it affords the nonprofit organization a much lower rate of interest than a typical tax exempt financing would offer. So, and only 501c3 organizations and governmental entities can take advantage of this type of tax exemption.
Hey, John, there's a $10 million cap.
There is.
I say that's the.
And that is one of the issues we will need to take into account. If it is going to be bank qualified, we will need to ensure that we have no reasonable expectation that we will exceed $10 million in issuance that would be qualified for bank qualified tax exempt financing.
During this fiscal year.
That's correct. And as it stands right now, I don't believe we have any other
That's what led
issuances
that's what led
that
to my
want to
question
be.
to you. Because just as an aside, we did close the Citroni ambulance
Just gonna ask that, that's right.
transaction
Thank God.
right at the
2012.
brink of midnight. And the reason we had to is because respectfully to LifePath had come to John and me probably in the fall of last year and said, we want a refund. And if Citronia had moved into 2013, we would have exceeded the $10 million. And some of the people at Citronia would have then needed their own ambulances to take them to the hospital, okay? So fortunately, we were able to get the Citronia ambulance deal done. The authority was paid the fee that it was owed. Everybody's happy. That facility will now be constructed. It's going to be, and Cindy knows this from her work with the county, it's going to be a new ambulance facility coupled with the county, they call it the Grimm Center, where the autopsies are done. So,
The Green Crimson.
yeah, we're good to go with, now we're good to go with LifePath without that black cloud hanging over our heads.
John, do we need to, since we don't have the resolution today, can we wait until February 26th? Or are you working this in February and we have to do that electronically?
I don't believe the closing is going to occur until April.
Okay,
Okay, because
so we'll do the resolution.
Yeah, I mean, I
in
can
February.
circulate, what I'll do is I circulate it, and again, I apologize. I think I sent John an earlier draft, and then Ed and I tweaked it. So I'm happy to send it to all the board members, and if you're all okay with it, it's then basically we can get it signed, okay?
Can you
Go
just
ahead.
clarify again, though, you're logistically,
Yes,
you're saying that the authority needs to do a revenue note that will then be purchased,
yes.
and that falls outside of TEFRA?
Under these particular circumstances, it does. Okay?
That's my concern, is only
Well,
I'm not sure how that,
The use of proceeds is the
Well,
the
that's
end
it.
result. The use of
Howard, it's
proceeds is the
because
same project.
I don't know the nuances of tax law, but I think it stems in large measure because we're refunding a prior issuance that went through the whole TEFRA approval process.
Part of the TEFRA process is to comment on the
Yeah,
project at hand.
and Howard, actually on this particular issue, there's a multi-part test as it was explained to me under the Internal Revenue Code or the related Treasury regulations. And Stevens and Lee has concluded that all 2 or 3 of the parts of that test are met by what we're doing here.
but I would like to see in the resolution some notation. That my concern is that we're issuing a new debt document. And I understand what you're saying, but I think it needs to be in the resolution that it's been vetted at least through Stevens and Lee, that's the opinion that the TEFRA is not required. Because I see that as a
They don't provide that in their
problem.
opinion letters, so, I mean. that
No,
is,
they don't, actually, the resolution typically mentions a TEFRA hearing.
Yeah, it does.
And
Well, that's why-
Ed deleted it because of from this very issue.
We'll certainly get
But
them
I'll-
to provide,
that's fine.
opinions.
I'll
on that
circle
matter.
back with
That's a
them.
good
That's
point.
not an issue.
Then I don't feel bad for not
I'm
bringing
just
the
concerned that we're
resolution.
issuing a debt.
Certainly bond council is going to make sure we follow through with this.
Trust
with
me.
all, the appropriate detail.
It's a
No
classic
question.
case of, with bond counsel in every one of these deals is a critical factor because it's not pushing the button.
Mhm.
It's what button do you push. That's why they get paid the big money.
And, I'm very supportive of the concept. I just want to
Yeah.
make sure that we do all of
It would avoiding the TEFRA, and in just as background, what we did last fall, we had to go to 5 counties to get approval. We will probably chop off 2+ months in this one.
Okay, thank you for that background. We'll put that on the agenda for February 26th.
Great,
And you'll
thanks.
add some
I will add some
language
language.
around
I'll circle back
Stevenson
with
Lane.
that.
Okay,
Okay.
sounds good. Any other questions on Lehigh? Okay. Other business?
Nothing further.
Any projects on the horizon that we may be pursuing?
There are some potential projects that will say there's nothing worth commenting on at this point, but perhaps the next meeting there will be.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, with that, our next meeting is February 26th, here, 3:30. John, as always, will put the agenda out for us a few days in advance so we can comment or update. And if we have no further business,
I'd
I'd like
just
to...
ask one thing, if the authority members could let me know if they are not going to be able to be in attendance for that meeting, we will need a quorum to vote on the resolution that John has outlined.
Or if you can't, at least be available by conference call for that 5 minutes where the resolution
Can hold
is
special meetings
finalized.
of the authority if need be, but we would need to obviously advertise them in association with the Sunshine Law.
Okay.
All right, with that, we're adjourned.
Thank you
very
very
much.
much.